Hey, it's Ben Alfrey here, your virtual CTO. I am showing you an integration exercise. We started out in some other videos that I did. We started out with this cropping tool, and it's just prototyped in CodePen. So it's working in CodePen. This is the type of thing that I would create and ship off to the development team, right? So that they had a working version to reference as they built it into the application. We went through all kinds of checks here. We checked for all the current version dependencies that our larger project relies upon. We checked for languages. I mean, this thing is working. If you look at previous videos, you'll see this thing is working using all of the dependencies of the larger project. So right here is the larger project. This is a WYSIWYG editor, and I've integrated the image cropping tool in it. So the way it works is you click on an item here, and it brings up a little editor, and watch this. You can zoom, and you'll see in the background there, it's adjusting the picture. So you can zoom, you can crop, you can do whatever. We can find that starfish that we were playing with. We can load that guy in there. So everything is working just how I wanted it to, but this integration was really, really tough to do. So just because it's working and it's easy, getting from here to here actually took quite a bit of effort, and I just wanted to do a little bit of a dive into the technical guts so that you can have an appreciation for the difference between just prototyping something and having it working, and sometimes the yawning chasm between the prototype and the integrated final product. And we're not even done with this yet. It doesn't actually save these images, it just modifies them on screen. So let's take a little bit of a look at all the code that it took to do this. So I have here my source code editor. This is a Laravel site. All of these files are Laravel site files. And what you can see is that resources is the only folder that's been modified. And that just clues you in that we've only done what are called front-end modifications. That is the HTML. We haven't done any server-side programming yet, so this is still not fully integrated. But let me show you some of the things that we changed. If I go here to the command line, I'm using Git for this project, and I can see here all the files that have been modified. Let's take a look at some of these modifications. This is the type of stuff that I do on a code review basis. So if somebody else were to have done this integration and sent it to me for code review, I might take a look at what they did, the code quality, make sure that it matches, whatever standards we have on the project. I personally don't have huge standards for coding quality. I like to make sure the code is clear and that it doesn't have, side effects. But as far as, exact notation, variable naming convention, stuff like that, I find that's less important than just high quality code in the sense that the workmanship is good, but personal preferences being what they are fine, as long as there's not, a practical negative to the coding technique. So this here is what I would look at to do the code review. In this case, I'm reviewing my own code, but I do that too. And you can see the big chunk of green here is the stuff that I have added, and it took a lot of trial and error. Basically, what this chunk of code does is it takes the image that's here and it puts it into the editor at the same size and preserves the zoom ratio and all of that kind of stuff. And it also, makes it so the main image updates when I update the preview here. So that's what all of this does, and it took a huge amount of trial and error that wasn't present in this Crop It demo, right? Because I didn't really anticipate it. What I wanted was a working prototype of, yes, I can zoom in on the Donald's lips and I can export that for my personal collection, and it works. That's the working prototype. The integration part is where you start actually using it and thinking about it from a user standpoint and saying, gee, when I'm editing this thing and moving it around, I'd really like it if the main image moved around too, if it reflected all those changes. Exact zoom ratios are another thing that I had to play with. So all of these little issues came up in the integration phase, and that's why integration takes a lot more work than you think. Integration is the process, yes, of getting the prototyped code to work in your platform, but it's also the process of examining it from a usability standpoint and configuring it so it's actually usable in the context in which you have put it. So integration is much more than just copying and pasting code, and that's what I had to do here. So there's a tremendous amount of complexity here. It doesn't look like it. When it all is distilled down to this, you think, well, that's easy. But each one of these lines, every single one of these lines took experimenting, testing, debugging, verifying, making sure that it worked the way I thought it was going to work. And then when it did work the way I thought it was going to work, me rethinking again, well, now that I see how that's working, I actually want it to be a little bit different. So all of that polishing took place here to get us to this point. And that's just one file. There are other files too. Let's take a look at another one. We had to take a look. We had to change some style sheet assets, and you can see we did hardly anything at all. I created a file. I created a file here named crop it, which has basically the identical CSS from the prototype, and I've integrated that in with the rest of everything else. So not too much going on there. Let's take a look though at all these views that had to change. These are basically the web pages. So if we look at this, we had to add the migration plugin. We had to add a plugin that I didn't have in the prototype that determines the actual size of images. That was part of the polishing aspect. We had to add somewhere in here. I will show you. It just so happens these two lines right here were this line, jQuery crop it, was already there from before because I was doing a little experimenting, but actually that's part of what we had to add. So we had to add 3 JavaScript resources. We had to do a bunch of user interface changes here to facilitate the new image editing field, and that's actually all the HTML it took. So most of the work was in JavaScript, but this took some time to figure out too, and to figure out how to get everything cooperating together. This was not an easy integration, and I just really want to emphasize how difficult an integration this was. So even though it's a very small set of files, or it seems like it, the integration to actually get this working and to get it working smoothly the way I want it to took a lot of thinking, took a lot of effort, trial and error. One of the things I realized in the integration phase is I want to save the original image as well as the cropped version of the image, so that if the user wants to go back later and change it and zoom it out again, he can get the original image back. Does that make sense? So you don't want to just zoom in and then throw away the original image. That's one way to do it, but that's not a great integration, because this is much more usable if I can say, I don't really like that after all, let me adjust it and go back. So these are integration issues that came to mind only after I started with this working prototype and spent hours and hours and hours of time getting it folded into our code. It works great now, and I'm really happy that we did our research ahead of time and that we started with a working prototype, because there were several times where stuff stopped working in here and I had to go back and say, wait a minute, is that behavior the same in the prototype? And in some cases it was, and in some cases it wasn't. In some cases I had to go back and adjust the prototype a little bit to get more of the desired behavior that I wanted. In other cases, it will only behaved a certain way here, and the desired behavior was correct here, and so I was able to compare side by side, well, what's different here versus here. So it's a very powerful approach to adding new features, and I'm very happy with how this one came out. I hope that makes sense. I try not to get too technical on the code side, but I think it's really important that you see the difference between the prototyping step and the integration step, and all of the extra additional thought and modification that goes into integration. All right, I'm going to leave it here.